Disclaimer: this content contains intense themes of fear, anxiety, and psychological distress. Viewer discretion is advised. Welcome. Here, stories come alive, filled with fear and the unknown. Each one opens a door to places best left unseen. A warning: these tales may stir anxiety, a sense of helplessness, and a tension that lingers long after the story ends. Make sure you're ready to walk this path to the very end. If you are, turn off the lights, settle in, and enjoy the story. Brief summary of the story.
David Parker Ray, known as the Toy Box Killer, was one of the most sadistic criminals in American history. In the late 1990s in New Mexico, he lured victims into a specially outfitted trailer, the Toy Box, where he held, tortured, and sexually assaulted women for days, sometimes even weeks. Although he was arrested in 1999, the true number of his victims remains unknown, as many were never found. Police discovered horrifying recordings of his crimes, but were unable to prove many of the murders due to the lack of physical bodies. This case remains one of the most chilling real-life horror stories in the United States, a terrifying blend of cold calculation, cruelty, and hopelessness. Some names are whispered in true crime circles, names that freeze the blood even before the full story is told. David Parker Ray. To those who know, that name is enough. In the dusty outskirts of Truth or Consequences, New Mexico, a town whose very name feels like a cruel joke, a monster lived among ordinary people. A man who, behind the walls of a plain-looking trailer, built a private hell. They called it the Toy Box. But there was nothing playful inside. Inside that trailer, David Parker Ray spent years designing and perfecting instruments of torture most people couldn't even imagine. He wasn't just a killer. No, that would be too simple. He was an engineer of suffering, a patient architect of despair. Throughout the late 1990s, women began to disappear. Drifters, sex workers, women whose vanishings drew little public outcry. Many of them were never found. When the truth finally came to light in 1999, it wasn't because of a grand investigation. It was because of a single woman who refused to die. Police found videotapes, hours of footage documenting what had happened inside the toy box. Photos, audio recordings, a hand-drawn torture manual, but no bodies. Without corpses, prosecutors could prove only a fraction of his crimes. David Parker Ray died before he could ever be fully judged. Some say it was justice. Others say he escaped the punishment he truly deserved. What remains is a chilling, incomplete picture of one of the most horrifying serial predators in American history. A man who built his own private nightmare and invited the forgotten to live and die inside it. And as you'll soon realize, then some horrors don't end when the door closes, they echo forever.
Chapter 1: The Early Years of the Monster.
Before David Parker Ray became the Toy Box Killer, he was just a boy. Born on November 6, 1939 in Belen, New Mexico, he entered a world already rough, already broken. His father, Cecil Ray, was a violent, alcoholic drifter, a man who showed up only occasionally, usually bringing chaos with him. His mother, Nettie, struggled to keep the family afloat, but poverty gnawed at their lives like rats in the walls. When David was still young, his parents' marriage crumbled completely. He and his sister were sent away. shipped off to live with their strict, unforgiving grandparents in the bleak desert of Mountain Air, New Mexico. It wasn't a place for dreams. It was a place for survival. The house was cold, both in structure and in spirit. Affection was rare. Kindness even rarer. Discipline was doled out with a heavy hand and little explanation. David grew up isolated, lonely. And when Cecil did visit, he didn't bring warmth. Instead, he brought pornography, magazines filled with violent, graphic images. He shoved them into David's young hands and told him, "This is what women are for." David was just a boy learning the wrong lessons about intimacy, about power, about what it meant to control or destroy. The seeds were planted early, seeds of domination, of cruelty, of the twisted idea that pain could be pleasure, and that women were nothing more than objects to be used, broken, and discarded. At school, David was painfully shy, awkward, bullied. He never fought back. Instead, he retreated further into fantasy, dark fantasies, private worlds where he was the one in control, where no one could humiliate him again. As a teenager, those fantasies grew sharper, more vivid, more violent. He began drawing detailed sketches of women bound and tortured. He kept notebooks filled with diagrams, elaborate plans for devices meant to inflict maximum suffering without causing immediate death. To anyone who noticed him, David Parker Ray was just another quiet, awkward kid. No one saw the monster taking shape behind his downcast eyes. No one saw the way the desert's emptiness seeped into him, filling the hollow spaces with a hunger he would one day unleash on the world. And by the time they did notice, it was already too late.
Chapter 2. Building the Toy Box.
There's a certain horror in how methodical evil can be. David Parker Ray didn't stumble into violence. He didn't lose control in a fit of rage. He built it piece by piece, with patience, with purpose. By the time the 1980s rolled around, David was living in Elephant Butte, New Mexico, a sun-scorched town near a sprawling reservoir, isolated enough that no one asked too many questions. It was here that he began construction on what would become his masterpiece, his private kingdom of pain, the toy box. He purchased an old white trailer, unremarkable from the outside, just another relic rusting under the desert sun. But inside, he transformed it. The walls were lined with soundproof insulation. No screams would escape. Chains hung from the ceiling. Handcuffs were bolted into steel frames. There were whips, syringes, surgical instruments carefully laid out like tools in a mechanic's shop. He installed a gynecological chair, always modified for his purposes, complete with straps to bind arms, legs, head, and waist. Cold, clinical, indifferent to suffering. Drawers were filled with narcotics, drugs to paralyze, to erase memory, to render his victims helpless but aware. On the walls, he mounted detailed diagrams, charts showing how to inflict the most pain with the least damage. Techniques perfected not for efficiency, but for endurance. Every tool had a place, every device had a purpose, and at the center of it all, a mirror mounted on the ceiling, so his victims could watch themselves suffer, helpless, hopeless. Ray didn't just build a torture chamber, he built an experience, a theater of agony. He even recorded audio tapes, sickening scripts that he would play for his captives upon waking. Voices that explained in calm, clinical tones exactly what was about to happen to them. Exactly what they would endure. No ambiguity, no hope. The toy box wasn't chaos, it was order. A factory of horror meticulously maintained by a man who believed he was an artist. And as the trailer neared completion, David Parker Ray began to prepare for its first guest. He didn't see himself as a murderer, he saw himself as a craftsman. And soon, his work would begin.
Chapter 3: Hunting for Victims.
For David Parker Ray, it was always about planning. Victims didn't just stumble into his grasp. He sought them out. He studied them. And when he was sure they wouldn't be missed, he acted. Ray didn't hunt for women who would spark immediate investigations. He chose those society already forgot: sex workers, runaways, addicts. To him, they were perfect. No missing persons reports, no families raising alarms, no police kicking in doors. It all started with a conversation. He knew how to be charming, just enough. He would offer a ride, an invitation to a party. Sometimes he promised easy money for small jobs. And when the woman agreed, when she stepped into his car, her life was already over. Sometimes he wasn't alone. His girlfriend, Cindy Hendy, often helped lure the women, making them feel safe. A woman with another woman, easier to trust. They hunted like predators wearing human masks. And once the trap snapped shut, there was no escape. Ray kept anesthetics in his car, ropes, handcuffs, everything methodically prepared. When the victim lost consciousness, he drove her straight to the toy box. And there, the real nightmare began. For Ray, it wasn't about killing, it was about the process, the ritual. And in his twisted game, the victims never stood a chance.
Chapter 4: Hell Inside the Trailer.
Inside the toy box, there was no time, no day, no night, only pain. When David Parker Ray's victims woke up, they were no longer people. They were objects, subjects for experiments he had spent years perfecting. Most woke up restrained to the gynecological chair, arms, legs, waist, even the head strapped tightly so they couldn't move an inch. Above them, a mirror hung from the ceiling, forcing them to watch every moment of their own suffering. The room was cold, sterile, lit by flickering fluorescent lights that buzzed endlessly as if mocking them. Their introduction to the toy box began with a voice. Not Ray's voice in person, but a pre-recorded message he played through an old cassette deck. A calm, clinical voice. It explained in excruciating detail what would happen to them. How they would be tortured, how they would be kept alive for days, maybe weeks, for his pleasure. The recording made it clear there would be no rescue, no negotiation, no mercy. Some women screamed, some wept silently. It made no difference. Ray approached them like a surgeon preparing for a procedure, methodical, unfeeling. He used whips, clamps, electric shock devices he had modified himself. He had racks of homemade tools, objects twisted beyond recognition into instruments of pure agony. Sometimes he would drug his victims just enough to paralyze them but leave their minds awake, aware, so they could feel everything, every cut, every burn, every violation. Other times he preferred them conscious, screaming. He documented everything, photographs, videos, proof of his control, proof of his mastery. On the walls of the trailer, detailed diagrams showed different positions, different restraints, each with notes about how long the human body could endure before giving out. To Ray, it wasn't cruelty for cruelty's sake. It was an art form. He considered himself a craftsman of pain, a pioneer in the science of destruction. There was no rage, no emotion, only the cold, mechanical execution of suffering. When he grew tired of a victim, the outcome varied. Some were drugged into oblivion and dumped into the desert, memories shattered by chemicals. Some were never seen again, and some remained forever in the darkness of the toy box, their final moments lost in the sterile hum of fluorescent lights and the hollow echo of their own screams. Inside that trailer, there were no second chances, no miracles, only the endless patient machinery of horror turning and turning until there was nothing left.
Chapter 5: The Escape.
Sometimes survival comes down to a single moment, a flash of instinct between life and death. For Cynthia Vigil, that moment came on March 22, 1999. She had been working the streets of Albuquerque when David Parker Ray and his accomplice, Cindy Hendy, approached her. He posed as an undercover cop, flashing a fake badge, claiming she was under arrest. Before she could resist, the taser struck her. Electric pain ripped through her body, darkness closed in. When she woke, she was chained inside the toy box, naked, cold, trapped. Above her, the mirror reflected her own terror back at her. Beside her, the tape recorder clicked on. The voice, calm, detached, described in graphic detail what would happen to her. Cynthia was not the first. She knew that. She could feel it in the cold air, in the stains on the walls, in the mechanical precision of every movement David made. He treated her like an object, a specimen. But Cynthia Vigil was different. She had a weapon David Parker Ray hadn't accounted for. She had rage. Days passed in a haze of agony, drugged, tortured, humiliated, and then opportunity. Cindy Hendy made a mistake. While preparing for another session, she left the keys to the restraints unattended. Just for a moment, a single moment, and Cynthia seized it. Despite the drugs, despite the chains biting into her raw skin, she fought. She clawed. She managed to free one hand. When Hendy returned, Cynthia attacked. The two women struggled, screamed. Cindy grabbed a nearby ice pick, slashing at Cynthia's body, but Cynthia, fueled by pure survival instinct, wrestled it away. She stabbed Hendy, broke free from her remaining bonds, and stumbled toward the trailer door. Naked, bleeding, terrified, but free. She ran. She ran through the desert barefoot, covered in blood, chains clanging against her wrists and ankles. She ran until she reached a nearby mobile home, pounded on the door with everything she had left. The woman inside opened it and saw a vision straight from a nightmare. Cynthia collapsed into her arms, gasping out a single desperate plea, "Help me." The police arrived within minutes. Cynthia's story sounded like madness, a dungeon, torture, a trailer filled with instruments of pain. But when officers entered David Parker Ray's property, they realized she hadn't even told them the half of it.
Chapter 6: Arrest and Interrogation.
The police officers who entered David Parker Ray's property that day would never forget what they found. At first, it seemed almost absurd. An old trailer parked behind a modest home near Elephant Butte Lake. Weather-beaten, ordinary. But when they forced the door open, reality shifted. The smell hit them first. The stench of chemicals, old sweat, something darker underneath. Then the sight, the toy box. Walls lined with whips, clamps, chains, surgical instruments. A gynecological chair bolted to the center of the room. Monitors and cameras mounted in the corners. A cabinet filled with drugs, sedatives, anesthetics, hallucinogens, and charts. Detailed hand-drawn diagrams showing methods of torture. Notes on how to prolong pain without causing death. Officers stood frozen, trying to process the scene. It wasn't a room built for killing. It was a room built for keeping people alive for as long as possible. David Parker Ray was arrested that same day. Cindy Hendy, too. At the station, Ray sat calmly across from the detectives, hands folded neatly as if he were sitting down for a friendly chat. He showed no panic, no guilt, no fear. To the officers, it was like staring into a black hole, a complete absence of humanity. When questioned, he denied everything, said Cynthia had consented, said it was all a misunderstanding. But evidence was piling up against him. In his trailer, police found videotapes, horrifying footage showing bound, terrified women being tortured. They found personal belongings, jewelry, shoes, scraps of clothing, none of which belonged to Cynthia Vigil. And worse, they found diaries, handwritten journals where Ray had detailed in chilling precision the acts he committed. Entries spanning decades, descriptions of kidnappings, descriptions of murders, each written in the same cold, clinical style as a mechanic recording car repairs. But even with all this evidence, there was a problem. No bodies. Without bodies, murder charges would be difficult to prove. The prosecutors knew it, the detectives knew it, and Ray knew it too. When pressed about the missing women, Ray smiled slightly and said nothing. A dead man can't confess, a dead woman can't testify. And so the battle wasn't just to lock him away. It was to pull the truth out of a man who had built a life around hiding it. Detectives worked day and night trying to piece together the full scale of what had happened behind the closed doors of the toy box. And as more evidence surfaced, it became clear Cynthia Vigil had not been the first, and she might not have been the last.
Chapter 7: Dark Secrets.
In the weeks following David Parker Ray's arrest, detectives peeled back the layers of his life, uncovering horrors deeper than anyone could have imagined. The toy box was only the beginning. Inside Ray's home, they found more evidence, hundreds of items cataloged with meticulous care. Locks of hair, scraps of clothing, jewelry, trophies. Each item once belonged to a woman who had entered his world and never walked out. Police seized dozens of videotapes. On them, grainy footage showed women, terrified, bound, subjected to unspeakable acts. Most of the faces were unrecognizable, twisted in agony or obscured by restraints. The videos were cataloged just like the tools in the toy box, labeled, organized, filed away, as if each victim were just another entry in a monstrous collection. Ray's journals were even worse, thousands of handwritten pages spanning over 20 years. He described his techniques in clinical detail, how he would abduct, restrain, and psychologically break his victims. He wrote about drugging women with barbiturates to erase their memories before releasing them, ensuring they could never fully testify. And in some entries, he hinted at murders. Quiet, passing mentions of bodies dumped in Elephant Butte Lake. Graves dug in the desert. No dates, no names, only cold, detached references to disposals. When detectives tried to trace missing persons reports, they found a horrifying pattern. Women had vanished from nearby towns for decades. Sex workers, hitchhikers, vulnerable people, and almost no one had noticed. Ray operated in a perfect storm of neglect. His victims were the forgotten, the invisible. Without bodies, prosecutors struggled. They could charge him with kidnapping, assault, sexual torture, but proving murder would be nearly impossible without physical evidence. Still, investigators dredged Elephant Butte Lake, searching for remains. They dug up stretches of desert, but the land kept its secrets. Officially, David Parker Ray was never convicted of a single murder. Unofficially, detectives believed he had killed dozens, maybe more. The final chilling discovery came when they realized Ray hadn't worked alone. Besides Cindy Hendy, there were others. Suspected accomplices who may have helped lure victims or cover up crimes. Some cooperated, some disappeared. But the full truth? It remained buried in the sand and water of New Mexico, whispered only by the empty places Ray had once ruled. In the end, the greatest horror wasn't just what David Parker Ray did. It was how easily he had gotten away with it. For years, right under everyone's nose. And even now, no one knows how many victims truly passed through the toy box, or how many cries for help were swallowed by the desert, never to be heard again.
Chapter 8: Trial and the End of the Road.
The arrest of David Parker Ray sent shockwaves through New Mexico. But as the case moved to court, the enormity of his crimes clashed with the cold mechanics of the legal system. Without physical bodies, prosecutors could not charge him with murder. They focused instead on kidnapping, sexual assault, and torture. Heavy charges, but ones that somehow felt inadequate for the scale of his evil. Ray pleaded not guilty. He sat in the courtroom composed, almost bored, as witnesses described unimaginable horrors. He watched Cynthia Vigil take the stand, her voice trembling as she recounted her escape. He listened as other survivors, women who had been drugged and discarded, pieced together fragmented memories of the toy box. And yet through it all, Ray showed no emotion, no anger, no shame, nothing. A black hole in human skin. The prosecution built their case methodically, presenting the videos, the journals, the physical evidence from the trailer. They painted a portrait of a man who had lived a double life. A mild-mannered mechanic on the outside, a sadistic predator behind closed doors. But defense attorneys fought back. They questioned the credibility of the victims. They pointed out the lack of murder charges. They implied, without ever saying it outright, that some of the women might have agreed to what happened. Ray's trial dragged on for months. Delays, mistrials, legal maneuvering, and just as it seemed justice might finally be served, David Parker Ray made one final move. In 2002, after agreeing to a plea deal that would have locked him away for the rest of his life, he suffered a massive heart attack. He died in his jail cell before sentencing could be carried out. No prison time, no final judgment, just silence. A death that felt too easy for a man who had inflicted so much suffering. For his victims, there was no real closure. Only the hollow knowledge that their tormentor had slipped away without ever fully paying for what he had done. The toy box remained, an empty shell. The trophies remained. silent witnesses to crimes that would never see full justice. And in the desert winds around Elephant Butte, the ghosts of the forgotten still whisper.
Final chapter, Echoes in Eternity.
David Parker Ray is dead. The toy box is silent. The desert, once a mute accomplice to his horrors, stretches quietly under the New Mexico sun. But the story doesn't end there. It never does. For every confirmed survivor, there are questions that hang in the air, haunting, heavy. How many women never made it out? How many voices were silenced forever inside that trailer? The police searched. They dredged lakes, dug into the dry earth, followed rumors whispered in the forgotten corners of the Southwest. But the desert is vast, and the desert keeps its secrets. Officially, David Parker Ray was linked to only a handful of victims. Unofficially, investigators believe he may have killed up to 60 women, maybe more. Their names, their faces, their final moments, lost in the shifting sands and the dark corners of memory. For the survivors, life after the toy box was a different kind of prison. Nightmares that never fade, trust forever broken, a sense that evil isn't something lurking in the shadows. Sometimes it lives next door, disguised by a smile and a handshake. Today, the toy box is gone. The trailer was dismantled, the property sold. New families live near Elephant Butte Lake, raising children, walking dogs, laughing in the same sun that once watched unimaginable horrors unfold. They don't talk about David Parker Ray much anymore, but late at night, when the wind howls across the open desert, when the shadows stretch long and deep across the land, some say you can still hear them, faint, almost swallowed by the emptiness, the echoes of the ones who never came home, the echoes of the toy box, whispering, waiting, refusing to be forgotten.
You've just listened to a chilling true story, The Toy Box Killer. If you want more nightmares whispered into your ears, the best way to support us is by leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. The bigger our community grows, the faster and better we can bring you new, terrifying stories. Thank you for staying until the end. See you in the next nightmare.